welcome to everyone that's here already. And welcome to you, Alexander Shlyk. We're really glad that you could join us. And so this debate today will be 1.5 hours, and we'll be talking about the political situation in Belarus, amongst other things. And this event today is organized by the European Debate Initiative, and we are an organization that organizes debates on different political topics that we find interesting, and we invite guests such as Alexander today that are interesting and are experts on their field. And if you want to be updated on these events, you should find us on Facebook. We call it European Debate Initiative. Let's start with some practical information about this debate today. So first of all, it's recorded if you want to rewatch it or send it to your friends later. And if you have any questions during this debate, you're very welcome to write them in the chat, and then we'll ask them for you, or we can give you the floor. And please ensure that your questions are questions and not statements for the sake of the time. Yes, so first, I would like to give a brief introduction to our guest speaker today. We're really honored that you wanted to join. So you are the special representative for elections of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the Belarusian opposition leader. And previous to this, you worked in the OSCE, in the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. And you've also worked in the World Bank, and you have a MA in Political Science and a Master of Science of International Development and Management, if I have my information correct. Let me know if any of this is wrong, of course. But yeah, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Everything's correct, and I'll let you manage the questions and pose them as they come in, and I hope they do come in. Among the attendees, I can see quite a number of familiar names, and I want to welcome everybody, and especially those who I know from both our work on Belarus and the international work that I've been doing.
Great. Yeah, so let's jump right in, and we'll start with what is, I think we all came for today, is really like to know the situation in Belarus. So to give maybe just a brief background to the country and what's going on is, so Belarus gained independence from the Soviet Union in '91. And then since '94, Alexander Lukashenko has been in power, and he has not tolerated any political opposition. And it's also clear today. And after Lukashenko had jailed most of these opponents prior to the elections last summer in August, the opposition then united behind Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who actually stepped in to run for her husband, who was a popular blogger who was jailed also last year in May. And her message in the beginning was simple. She said, "Free all political prisoners and hold real elections." So she and two other women, Maria Kolesnikova and Veronika Slikalo, attracted a lot of support. Yeah, and so after the elections, Lukashenko claimed that he had received 80% of the vote, but a lot of international observers and others, of course, said that this was not true and the election was rigged. And this started mass protests. And the authorities have responded with a lot of violence, and a lot of political prisoners are now jailed. And according to the Human Rights Center, Vyazna, there are right now 354 political prisoners in Belarus. Yes, so I want to ask you as an introduction, if you could maybe update us on the current situation right now, and maybe about the protests. Are they, well, they're still happening, but how sizable are they compared to back in August, maybe?
Well, thank you very much. This is a really good introduction. I think you've pointed to the key issue that we have at hand. Obviously, we do have an ongoing political crisis, but I think we can safely say that this crisis has gone beyond the scope of political. It is having an impact on the economic affairs, and it is definitely a human rights crisis. One may say even a humanitarian crisis. As a matter of update, I could let you know that your data is correct, but correct as of a couple of weeks ago. At the moment, I've just verified with the team. At the moment, we have 340 political prisoners, and up to today, about 35,000 people have gone through repressions, which is mostly related to them being detained or being fined for substantial sums of money, but mostly detained. Fines are no longer a deterrent, and probably I'll get back to this point a bit later on how this is functioning and how the solidarity of the Belarusian people is in a way forcing the current regime to exercise the repressions of a very different kind, such as jailing people and posing the accusations of absolutely unsubstantiated nature, including allegations of criminal offenses. But I wanted to get back to a couple of points that you mentioned as well. I think you're very right to point out that Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya stood in the election to replace her husband, but I think we can all agree since the last election that she has affirmed herself as the leader of the democratic forces. And an interesting detail for our attendees is that in just a short period of time following the falsified elections, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has met more world leaders and the leaders of the countries than President Lukashenko or citizen Lukashenko has managed to meet in the almost 27 years of his tenure. And the list is growing, and the amount and the force of the international solidarity with Belarus is actually quite impressive. What matters a great deal is something that you also mentioned. The fact that Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya stood for elections was a very simple one-line message. She was running not to rule, she was running to create an opportunity to hold new, normal democratic elections. And that remains the key objective of the popular struggle at the moment. We definitely see the falsified elections last year as the entry point to the current crisis, but we also know in connection with this that the democratic elections, the rerun of the elections would be the exit point of the crisis as well, will be the peaceful solution of the crisis. You would know that about a month ago, we have come up with the initiative that we do want to conduct negotiations with the representatives of the authorities. We're very careful to say that we're not aiming for negotiations with Lukashenko. We're realistic, and I think that the goal for us is to find a peaceful solution for the crisis through the means of the negotiations. And the key objective for these negotiations, the key output of the negotiations would be holding new elections. And I think this is very well merited because it's beyond doubt that the last elections are not reflecting the will of the people. It's so obvious that to the point that Lukashenko himself and very recently the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the current government have been pointing out that it's actually, I call it the acrobatics of the rhetoric. They've started from saying, oh, it's beyond doubt that the Lukashenko has won the elections. The issue is just these numbers. So they're calling under questioning themselves the accuracy of the numbers reported and trying at the same time to not call under doubt the validity of the last year elections. I think this is a deeply flawed argument because when they themselves acknowledge that the numbers do not reflect the reality, it automatically begs the question, can we trust these numbers at all? And the reports of the citizen observers, and we could get back to this point of citizen observation as well during the discussion today, the reports show very clearly that the protocols obtained from the polling stations demonstrate that the results were absolutely falsified. I'll stop at this moment and maybe we'll go into more details, including the current nature and the state of the protest, of the struggle a bit later in the debate.
Yes, thanks. John, I think you wanted to connect to the next point here.
Yes, exactly, because you just mentioned that citizens observers and also namely the OSCE have concluded that the elections and the allegations that were posed towards Lukashenko were full with merit, that the presidential elections were not transparent, free, or fair, and found to be confirmed. And that kind of already like brings us to the topic of elections. And you being the special representative for elections, I was wondering, what do you do as a special representative for elections in a country where those processes are not fair and not transparent?
Thanks, John. That's a two-part question, yeah? Let's go back in time to August last year, maybe even earlier than that. At that time, I was working as the head of election department at the OSCE ODIHR, but I have always been the Belarusian citizen. And the golden rule in the election department of the ODIHR is that once you're a citizen of some country, you never touch upon that country at all. So what I could provide to you as information is something that's available in the public domain. If you want to get more on that, please do get in touch with the ODIHR office and they can maybe give a more sort of detailed response. But the fact remains that the OSCE observers and international observers such as Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE or of the Council of Europe were not present at the last year presidential election on 9th of August. This has created a bit of a controversy internationally. Obviously, you could see that in the media coverage, both from the East and the West. And but the fact remains that the Belarusian authorities did not create the necessary conditions for observation. The invitation to observe came on, if I'm not mistaken, 15th of July. That is what, 3.5 weeks before the elections were to be held. And interestingly, that was the day exactly after the registration of the candidates has concluded. And by that time, the prospective candidates, a number of prospective candidates have already been jailed. Some of them have not been registered. The commissions for the conducting of the election have already been formed, and the process was already really ongoing. And that was at that time that the invitation came. So a good deal of the process, a good chunk of the process was not observable any longer. So that didn't create the conditions for a normal observation based on the standard methodology. And the international observers were not there. But the citizen observers have actually done a tremendous job in Belarus. It was impressive how much effort has gone into this. And, you know, maybe to give you examples of that, people were literally taking leave of work to enlist themselves first to try to get as the commission members, and they were not successful because those who were forming the commissions made sure that they didn't get in. And then they didn't give up. They wanted to be the citizen observers. They wanted to register by collecting signatures of their neighbors. That's one of the methods to be an observer. And then they feel that thousands of people around the country, most of whom never got access to see the process. Especially at the early voting, they were locked outside the polling station, so they couldn't follow much. At that time, the digital solution appeared that people were able to send in the photographs of their ballots and also to submit the copies and the photographs of the protocols that the commissions drew across the country. As the result, the collected data pointed very clearly in the direction that the overall results reported by the Election Commission were not to be trusted. And I think that this was something that underpinned what we see is still ongoing today. This motivation to engage in the democratic process, to not only participate as the supporters of this or that candidate, but to participate as citizens who are interested in voting, who are interested in watching the polls, who are interested in taking part as commission members. That has been a tremendous shift in attitudes since the last elections. But I think we can all see that the simple message of we want normal elections has really resonated with the people. So, and the question you're posing is very correct. What does a special representative do in a situation when we all know what the elections currently are like? Well, that's exactly the point of my work, to create the conditions, the legal grounds, and the sub-legal regulations and the practical grounds for conducting the good elections, which is something that is a campaign promise. And now of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya last year, and currently the chief objective of the popular struggle in Belarus. So the idea is that we would have the negotiations with the representatives of the authorities. The negotiations would result in the snap elections. Obviously, we're talking about presidential election. And a part of the negotiation would naturally be the formation of the election commission, Central Election Commission, that would be trustworthy. And running the election would be on the basis of the currently existing legislation with the support of the sub-legal regulations, the solutions, the practical solutions to how to implement this legislation. And that would pave the way to pretty decent elections. After that, we would absolutely need to take a look at the election legislation, but that's a midterm priority for the country. First, we need to get the snap elections underway, hold those, and then we can take a look at the closer look at the election laws. And that is also one of the areas of work in which I'm engaged, preparing the concept and later the draft of the new election code.
Nice. Yeah, thank you very much also for like kind of walking us through how like this election monitoring has really been pushed and kind of facilitated by civilians and by the kind of the will of the people in that sense. And thank you also for elaborating kind of how your what your task ahead of you is basically pushing for new elections, but then also kind of reforming the current Belarusian election policies and laws in a way that kind of hopefully make it more fair. Yeah, one thing that really stood out to me was like that you're mentioning how people driven this this push and this movement really is, and I think yeah, Zoe has a good question connecting to that. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned people and the people's power, but it must take a lot of courage to demonstrate against, well, a regime like this. What do you think is the motivation for citizens and just regular people that take the streets and, as you said, even took leave from their jobs to be involved? What's the idea behind this? Why are people willing to take these risks of being detained? Because as you mentioned, like more than 30,000 people are detained. Why would someone risk that?
Well, I think this connects very well to the initial question that you were posing. What's the current situation? What's the current status? Yeah. Yes, there is no, lately there hasn't been this image of massive groups of people demonstrating in Minsk or any other city. And the 25th of March, the national holiday of independence, the historical holiday, has not, which is a traditional occasion for people to go out on the streets. Yeah. That has not resulted in massive demonstrations. But then again, the Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya and the other political leaders of the opposition have not been calling on people to show up on the streets and demonstrate by marching on the streets like they have been doing last summer and autumn. Winter is also a bit of a depressing time. Yeah, we live in a climate where it's cold and a bit grayish, and the repressions also take a toll on the people. There is a bit of a reluctance, a bit of a fear to demonstrate openly on the streets and to go out in the hundreds of thousands like the folks were doing last year. But that doesn't mean that the demand for change has disappeared. Quite the opposite. Every single day we do see small activities here and there, and people take courage to show the full national flag, the historical traditional national flag on their balcony, for example. What happens next? The police arrives, the firefighters arrive occasionally, they put a ladder up to your balcony, they rip off the flag, they break the doors into the apartment, put the people face down on the floors, arrest them, sentence them to days, if not accuse them of criminal offense, and try to sentence them for years in jail. People get fired. So even a small step requires a tremendous courage these days. But that doesn't mean that people have given up. And I think what's motivating them, I actually do like a quote from one of the writers. She's a teacher as well, and pretty well known person in Belarus. She's mentioned something that resonated very well with what some of my friends have been saying. Yeah, the reason some of my friends have taken leave from their jobs last year to go and serve as observers, and they knew that they might not have a job to go back to, because in the meanwhile they might be fired for taking this step. The reason they were doing that is because they're plain and simple sick and tired of not being respected as citizens or as human beings. The thing that we're so against of is not a single person at the top of the regime. Yeah, the problem is that when the president screams at the ministers, and the ministers act as small boys, they're typically men in there. I can hardly remember any woman in power in Belarus, regretfully. That's also an interesting sign of what this system is like. Yeah, they look down as little boys, and then guess what happens next? They go back to their ministries and they scream at the next guy, and then that guy goes further on and screams at the next guy, and then eventually the boss of my friend screams at my boss and shows no respect to my friend as a human being, as a citizen, as a normal person. So that's what people are really sick and tired of. It's not anymore the politics of ideologies or demanding a change to how the country is developing. It's not a geopolitical struggle, we're pro-EU or pro-Russia, and nothing like that. It's an issue of dignity and self-respect in the end of the day. And I think that is what is motivating people to still take action despite the fear and the repercussions that they not only may, but almost certainly would face. So that's where it's growing from.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not even politics anymore. It's more this human need and right for a different society in a way. And what you say about the repercussions that may actually work also connects to these new bills that in April were pushed forward in the Belarusian parliament. And these new bills are planning to undermine even further freedom of speech and the work of independent journalists in Belarus. And these bills would also expand the restrictions on the mass media outlets. And it would also make it possible to shut down journalists' accreditation or even block their websites. And for example, can even prohibit journalists from live streaming if there's a demonstration going on. So this will definitely even further restrict the situation. So to what extent has the situation in a way deteriorated since the protest started, and why do you think it has, and is it working?
Well, I'll start from these bills. Yeah, you're very right to say that the adoption of these latest bills would expand the restrictions. But I think what is even more important is that adoption of these bills would legalize the restrictions that are already in place. A lot of things have been happening in Belarus since August and before that as well, that were not particularly legal, even under the Belarusian legal framework. No matter how draconian it has already been, some of the accusations are quite ridiculous. It's not like these bills get adopted now, and now you can stream a video from a demonstration. There are two journalists from the Belsat TV station, two ladies, who are jailed for exactly that. And they have committed this quote unquote crime without these bills being in place. Yeah. So something else has been interpreted in a way that would allow to jail them. So what's happening now is that there is a creation of this semblance of legality of what's going on. Yeah. But then in the end of the day, if you look at it in a sort of a critical and analytical way, let's not forget that even the current constitution of Belarus, Article 8, contains a provision that Belarus recognizes the priority of the norms of international law. So what I have to say about these current bills is nothing particularly new. It's the legalization of the already ongoing violations of the constitutional and international norms. That doesn't mean that doesn't make it any more legal. And that just, automatically reminds me of a famous quote that what's been happening in 1930s in Germany has been perfectly legal in very many occasions, in the sense of adhering to the law. Was it correct? Was it right? I think we all know the answer to it. And that's exactly what's going on right now. But I think that this is, when a parliament gets together to vote on something, it's also a good quote from my friends, yeah? Last year, the parliament was, trying to adopt some decisions, and then the TV was doing propaganda on, oh, don't do this, yeah? Don't listen to these people who are telling you these stories, yeah? And then an elderly friend of mine has said, aha, so the TV is not telling me not to do it. That probably means that I need to do exactly that. So people read between the lines. People are not buying this sort of creation of a semblance of legality. It's just that the parliament exists in its own imaginary space in a way. But what do you really expect from the parliament that has doubtful legitimacy to begin with?
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, and these, just connecting to these repercussions again, I mean, something is Parliament is probably going to pass these if they're voted upon. But this also kind of begs the question in a broader context, not necessarily in Parliament, but in society in general, who's still on Lukashenko's side? Like which groups in society are still in support? Because from a person that is not from Belarus, the picture you get is definitely that there's these mass uprisings that you think everyone must be on the opposition side, but there is definitely something sustaining the existing system. Yeah.
Well, apart from the brute force, there's definitely a great deal of an information sort of confrontation going on. Yeah. And the latest sociological research that we have reasons to believe, is showing that somewhere between 25 and 30% of the population are on the side of the current government. But that, the trick with being on the side has also to do with whether everybody who says they're on a certain side have information about what is the other side. An interesting example is, folks in Belarus get these monthly bills for their utilities. Yeah, it gets distributed in a paper format to your mailbox at home, and then you go to the bank or you go online and you pay these utility bills. I don't know, water, electricity, yada yada yada. Garbage management and so on. So a couple of days ago, there were pictures appearing that a whole bunch of these utility bills on the back side have the information that is marked with good to know. And it contains data such as 74% of the people support the policies of the current government. 50-something% of the people disapprove of what has been happening since last August. And I love this cryptic way of like, what we're talking about. We just don't want to define what's been going on since last August, yeah? And this is a kind of, when you have no internet access, when you don't have access to television channels or the press, forget about it. I mean, there's no independent press distributed to the folks around the country. I mean, the runs of the independent newspapers are minuscule, and basically there's no independent newspaper any longer, I think, that is beyond 1,000 copies. Then, where do you get the information to make a choice on whose side you're on? That's a very difficult, question to answer for a person who might not be informed so well. Yesterday morning, Euronews channel was shut down in Belarus. And now what they're broadcasting in its place is the Russian TV channel dedicated to the history of World War II. Euronews was asked for a comment yesterday, what's happened? And they're like, we have no clue. We learned about this being shut down from the news, just like you guys. So like early morning yesterday, they were gone. And they were the only non-Russian or non-Belarusian official TV channel that was running in the country. So, you know, Belarus is not a regular feature on Euronews, but at least, you know, folks could figure out or find out what's going on in Europe. But now, well, good luck. If you don't have internet, and internet is a separate story, yeah? I mean, for our audience, it might be interesting to hear, you know, this whole VPN access points, the encrypted messaging, the secret chats and the bot chats where you maintain anonymity, they're all proliferating and they're huge. There were more VPN connections in Belarus in August last year than in the whole of Iran, for example, where VPN has been used as the access point to online information for years. VPN providers and the internet access providers have been, international ones, have been dedicating gigabytes wide channels to Belarusian users. And that's really something. That's quite an impressive use of technology. But then again, going back to your question, yes, there are people who are voicing their support, but there's nothing wrong with that, right? They're not bad people. They're not, I wouldn't say they're wrong in their assessments. Everybody has their own reasons. What I very much hope for is that one day we have elections where people can make an informed choice and not a default choice.
Yes, thank you very much for also like highlighting the role of international support and also the use of internet. Actually, I read a very interesting piece on the use of Clubhouse and similar internet providers in Hong Kong, actually, where they used internet providers and VPNs and basically to communicate with each other. And I think I also noticed that some of your engagements went through some of those channels in order to promote some of the message that we all try to get out. I think what you mentioned just now also connects a bit more to what we wanted to ask about international support. Francesca?
Yes, well, what you interestingly said before, that this is not about geopolitics, but it's also about the issue of dignity and self-respect, and this motivates a lot of people in Belarus. And my question is on the role of Russia in this context, because it is true that Russia has been one of the only countries actively supporting Lukashenko, and President Putin even threatened to send security forces into Belarus. So yeah, my question is, I mean, maybe also looking at the historic role of the Soviet Union, and they intervened in the Czech Republic and Hungary. So we have this history. Is there a certain fear that this might happen in Belarus? Is this present?
Well, okay, let's face the reality, yeah? Russia is a very close friend, partner, neighbor. There are family ties. There are tons of people who have professional, personal connections to Russia. There's no discussion. There is no sense in even thinking of abandoning these, very close connections and ties. But I'm always talking about it in terms of, you could be family members, you could be cousins, you could be, siblings. Does that mean you have to live in the same apartment? Probably not. Everybody who, even the closest relatives, they at some point want to move out and, live their own life and, get together for family occasions and friendly get-togethers and be even better friends. It's easy to be in the better relations when you don't have to share the space. Yeah. So that's pretty much what we're talking about here. I think we can have an absolutely normal relation, friendly relation, very close relation, business-like relation as well with everybody, be it east, west, north, and south. Yeah, that's the current situation in Belarus is definitely not about geopolitics. There's no there's no intention of severing any kind of connections or moving in one direction or another as the immediate outcome of this current struggle. What happens in the future, and through the deliberations and amongst the politicians, with the society, that remains to be seen. And the sociological data shows that nobody is very few people are anti-something, anti-Russian or anti-EU or anti-American or anti-anything. And a lot of people find it difficult to answer this question when they're presented with a choice to make, because they don't want to make this choice. And in a way, we're also not a country that is divided by cultural or religious or ethnic cleavages. There's no East and West division. There is no North or South division in the country. So there's no cleavage on which the geopolitics would fall. Yeah. And that makes it both easy and difficult to have this struggle now. But what I think is extremely important in terms of the role of Russia is that everybody understands it better and better as the time goes by, that the current regime is sustaining its grip on power very much because or due to either the silent agreement of the Russian Federation or maybe occasionally even the proactive support, such as delivering the loans that are, by the way, needed to repay the previous loans. They're not a particularly productive loans these days. Yeah, you get a batch of money to repay your previous debt. But leaving business aside, yeah, folks are looking at it and they're seeing that, well, I know where I stand in relation to this government. I know why it's still maintaining its grip. And some folks are rethinking their attitude towards Russia, but that's not because, it's Russia, but it's because of this poisonous connection that they have with Lukashenko and the regime. And in the end of the day, if I was, it's hard for me to pretend I'm an impartial advisor to anybody these days. I'm impartial in my professional capacity, but if the Russian Federation ever asked me for advice, I'd be very honest in telling them, hey, get away from this poisonous relationship. What are you getting out of it? If you want to protect your interests, long-term interests in Belarus, you have to be reliant on the sympathies of the people of Belarus and not of the politicians who are also, by the way, human and come and go. And, you have to build connections to the people of the country. And the best way to build a connection to the people is to respect their wishes, is to treat them with, hear them and treat them with respect as well. So for the longer term relations between Belarusian people and the Russian people and the Russian government, I think it would make absolute sense for Russia to support the whole idea of a peaceful reconciliation in Belarus and maybe even act as a mediator in the process among other countries to be able to play the peacemaker role and not a role of an entity that supports one side in this. And that's, yeah.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
I hope it answers your question, Francesca.
No, yeah, it's very interesting because you say on the one hand, of course, you have all those close ties. And I mean, this is also culturally, historical and language-wise and family. And then on the other hand, yes, it's also maybe antagonizing that Russia supports Lukashenko so openly. And yeah, maybe what could explain this, I don't know what you think, is that Putin is afraid that if this succeeds or if this relatively peaceful transition or to democracy or to free elections succeeds, this could be a threat to him in Russia. Do you think this is maybe what motivates him so strongly to support Lukashenko?
Well, I think in a way we're beyond the point where a massive demonstration on the streets would have led to a replacement of a government. Yeah, if that's what you're talking about. I think we're beyond that. I think the hundreds of thousands of people who demonstrated peacefully last year and are still showing up on the streets, maybe in smaller numbers, this is not about them demanding that, they enter the government buildings and throw out the government and put themselves into these chairs. Yeah, this is not what's going on right now. And I think that this is a very good moment actually to find a peaceful solution that would not have a flare of a popular uprising leading to the change, if that's what you're talking about. But then at the same time, looking at it pragmatically, the longer the Russian Federation waits to become a peacemaker, the lower are the chances that the next person who's coming in as the result of a democratic election would be listening to our very important and big neighbor on the east, because that's not going to be something that the constituency would want. And that's where I think now is a pretty good time for exploring ways of how there could be several mediators for this negotiation process. And mediators maybe under the auspices of the OSCE, with Sweden leading it, maybe the big countries in the OSCE, and maybe the organization as such. And if anybody from my good friends in the OSCE community are listening in now, I don't see the list. Yeah, I guess some are here. Well, that's the idea, that let's get it fixed in a peaceful way, and everybody gains points. We gain democracy, and maybe some people get a Nobel Peace Prize for being the problem solvers.
Yeah, thanks a lot for elaborating on that. I think it's also what you just mentioned, that the three opposition leaders of the democratic movement, they were rewarded by, for instance, receiving the Sakharov Prize by the European Parliament in December. And Tsikhanouskaya has met a lot of international leaders across the world, more than Lukashenko has ever managed to. And do you think, for instance, that the EU or EU countries could play a role? I mean, the opposition that is still existent is now in European countries. They have tried to mobilize maybe international support. What do you think could other countries do to support the whole democratic movement?
Well, I think they're doing a lot already, and that's to be acknowledged. Yeah, there's a lot of support bilaterally from a lot of European Union member states, United States, Canada, many other countries. And the meetings at the highest possible level have really resulted in very tangible support that is provided, but also the support that is provided on the international scene. And I think that the key to success is to get together to put together a negotiating platform with the mediators who everybody could trust as a group, yeah? And big countries in Europe could definitely play a role. The countries that, have a big say in the European Union affairs, the European Union in itself, United States possibly, definitely Russia. They could be the guarantors of the agreements that could be reached in the negotiations. And I think obviously the OSCE in itself has a tremendous potential to provide support to these negotiations. Even if the OSCE as an organization is not a mediator or is a platform for the negotiations, it could well be, but even if it's not, I'm sure the good experts from the OSCE could be the ones who are advising on the technicalities of what is being discussed. What would be an acceptable solution for holding early elections? We're more than ready to listen. And I know directly, since I've been working with the OSCE for 10 years, I know there's a lot of people who would be impartial, very professional, and would provide their expertise to whoever is mediating in the negotiations. And we're ready to have them involved and to listen to them. And I very much hope that this goes forward. But I think that this is where we're at. We're getting a lot of support for the day-to-day issues, a lot of opportunities for outreach to the citizens of Europe as well, and beyond Europe. But I think it's time for for some tangible action by the governments, and hopefully the discussions in the OSCE and in other places would result in finding compromises and solutions and finding a so much needed consensus that what's going on in Belarus needs to stop.
Yeah, you're mentioning of the OSCE. I think it's very much in line with the tweet I saw from you from a couple weeks back, talking about like how you really hope for the OSCE like to play a facilitating role in those negotiations. From what you've been saying just now, it sounds to me like that you want the OSCE like to have a mediating role and basically help with the negotiations with the existing administration in a way. Is that the role for the OSCE that you see happening in this process? Is there any other way the OSCE can basically facilitate this process?
Short answer, yes, this could be well the role that the OSCE would play. The strong side of the OSCE is that it is it's a group of 57 very diverse countries. And yes, we all know that decisions in the OSCE are taken by consensus of all 57. That's why they're all so difficult sometimes to reach, and maybe leave a lot of people disappointed who want quicker, swifter, more resolute action from the OSCE. But the good news is that once the decision is made by a consensus by all 57, it's poised to stick, because to change principled decisions, you would need another consensus. To discontinue something, yeah.
I would also say that basically having a consensus in the OSCE countries basically automatically shows that everybody's on the same page, and also alleviates a lot of like from the like counter pressures which we were talking about from potentially Russia, that is like still strongly supporting the current administration.
I'm not that familiar with the internal discussions in the OSCE these days. Yeah, I'm out of the system. I have no idea on the details of what's going on. But from what I can see from the media coverage is that, and let's face it, Russia is a part of the OSCE and a very important player and a very important decision maker there, and the influential participating state of the organization. And that's absolutely normal and fine. Yeah, the organization wouldn't be the same if Russia wasn't part of it. Just like any 50 of the 57 countries, it would change the nature of it. But what I'm thinking of is that OSCE is such a possible mediating or a platform for the negotiations, exactly because it unites so many different countries. And when they come to a conclusion that something needs to take place, that means something. That means a lot. But in the end of the day, I mean, it's just a mediation role. Yeah. In the end of the day, the problems are for the Belarusian folks, for Belarusian citizens to resolve amongst themselves. It is just that, to have a meaningful dialogue, a third actor or a number of third actors need to be at the negotiating table. And I think there were a couple of questions here in the chat that I think it's a good moment to address. Is it realistic to negotiate with Lukashenko? Asks Katharina. Anything is possible in the world of politics, I think. But we are careful in not proposing or a negotiation with Lukashenko himself. It is always positioned, and that is, I think, what has helped us to get almost 800,000 votes on the online platform from amongst Belarusian citizens in support of this idea. That was the position that we took, that we're offering and we're proposing, and the negotiation was the representatives of the authorities. Who those might be is an interesting question. And there's a question up there from Tatiana, I think. Are you in touch with some representatives of the authorities who could help you to get to the negotiation table, to get to snap elections? Yes, a lot of people from within the system, if you can, use that term, are in touch. I think nobody likes what's going on. Nobody who has a, analytical abilities of any kind likes what's going on right now. This is an impasse. the country is not particularly governable, yeah? You can't run affairs so smoothly any longer because everybody has doubts. People in the authorities also have doubts. People don't want, even amongst the police and the security apparatus, they're not particularly comfortable doing what they're doing sometimes, or delivering on the orders that they're given. So I think many of them would actually not mind having an end to this situation. And we're not talking, when they're in touch, the messaging and the response is very simple. You have nothing to be afraid of unless you have committed violent and grave crimes. Then you face justice. But then that's at least going to be an honest court and not the sham court that we're witnessing these days. But, respond for your crimes, but those who have not violated the law significantly have nothing to fear about. Everybody is going to find their place in the system. And in the end of the day, we should also be pragmatic. Who's going to run the country in the countryside, yeah? Well, if if you dismiss all the lower level government officials, do we really think we're going to have a governable country? Probably not. And in the end of the day, we shouldn't be equating this violent crimes with the inability to resist and to say no. One is a crime, another one is a weakness. Maybe. Crimes need to be facing the court. Weaknesses you can deal with, you can live with. Everybody is of a different kind. Somebody goes to jail and goes on hunger strike. Somebody faces a difficulty saying no to the boss. Everybody's different.
Yeah, very interesting. When you talk about the whole system and people that are within it, that where you also talk to some of them to try to find this mediation, do you think some of them that are in this whole system, political, under Lukashenko and have been loyal to him so far, might not or be afraid to speak out because they don't know whether the whole process will be successful, and maybe in regard to Russia as well?
No, I wouldn't estimate the role of Russia here at all. I mean, of course, yeah, some of the government officials are looking eastward and looking for a move and the signal that, it's ending very, very soon. But I think my feeling is that the vast majority of people who are still not, voicing their views very openly, they're on the fence. They're waiting for a good moment to know where to jump of that fence, yeah? And in very many cases around the world in the history, we've seen that these kind of systems crumble after a singular event. It's kind of hard to predict what this event could be. It could be a crazy mistake made by somebody, yeah? It could be an economic downturn. We've had cases in the past when people were, withdrawing their money from in any possible way because they knew that, their money is going to evaporate the next day. This was an economic panic, an economic shock. I don't want that to happen. And that's exactly why I don't want some catastrophic event to result in a whole system crumbling because people would say, okay, this is the end. I better jump off the fence on the right side before it's too late, yeah? Okay, fine, we end the crisis, but we ended on the shambles of the system and we still have the catastrophic event with us. So maybe it's a good idea to get to the negotiating table before this catastrophe happens. Then at least we solve the situation. Nobody's ever going to get everything they want, and that's absolutely fine. That's what negotiations are for. But at least we don't have to live with the catastrophe and the aftermath of it. So before it collapses economically, maybe we should, find a way out. And I think that is a good message to the people who are still on the fence. The longer they sit, the more they have to lose in the end when things start falling apart, because they also have, salaries.
Yeah. No, I mean, it seems very reasonable that we want to find a way before the whole thing crumbles, that you find a way to mediate and have a transition maybe.
Yeah, but like, you know, a catastrophic event could be, I don't know, people go on the streets and some, I don't know, some strange policeman shoots somebody, yeah? That could be a catastrophic event that leads to, as it happened in very many places, like, you know, the Arab Spring, the guy who ignited himself, put himself on fire. I mean, it was not a sudden event, yeah, and things started moving very quickly after that. We can have a very different opinion of where things ended up in the end, yeah, but what we know for sure is that that guy is dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one thing that we really want to avoid. We want to avoid the crazy events and the catastrophic events that would leave us with dead people or injured people or an economic collapse.
Maybe adding to that, I have a question. You said before that Russia should play this mediating role,
among other countries.
Among other countries. Do you think that it's if EU countries or the EU puts more pressure on Moscow to negotiate something, this could this could be positive or lead to something?
I think you're being very optimistic about the way, you know, that EU could put pressure on Moscow or vice versa. These days it's a bit complicated, huh? I think it's not about putting pressure on anybody. I think it's figuring out that there is a mutually beneficial solution for bad things not happening in Belarus. It's in everybody's interest in the end of the day. And I think, you know, getting back to the role of the OSCE, I think we really need to, and the decision makers in the OSCE need also to remember that the organization has been created to prevent the crisis from happening and the security crisis from happening. And here we're definitely facing a economic security issue. We're facing the human rights angle of security issues, yeah, where any kind of political destabilization at the sort of borders of Russia and Europe is also potentially a crisis of a military nature. And crisis prevention is clearly in the mandate of the OSCE. We already have a crisis. Well, too bad we didn't prevent that one from happening, but at least, you know, before it goes into total disaster, maybe this is the time when the OSCE needs to exercise its mandate and its raison d'etre, no, to prevent the crisis.
Yeah, you mentioned the OSCE again, and basically like the way kind of discussion as well can be facilitated in order to de-escalate the tension that currently exists. But there was something you said earlier that kind of like sparked my attention, like the fact that the more the people have to lose, the more they should be willing to invest into like trying to solve the solution. But given the fact that we do see kind of the Belarusian political elites trying to also pass this new law that furthering restrictions, in a way, further imprisoning political activists. In a way, you would say that like they keep going down like this rabbit hole, and the further they go down, the more they actually might have to lose to open up to negotiations. Is that a fear you might have, that it might actually be the other way around? The further down they go, the more they have to lose, and the less willing they're there to negotiate and also to engage with the OSCE, possibly?
No, as I said, I think passing these laws doesn't fundamentally change anything. You know, the people were being arrested and sentenced for years in jail for a tweet before it was formally illegal. So, you know, what's the big news in passing these laws? Making it sound more legal? Yeah, fine, whatever. But who are they going to sell it to? You know, if somebody who was going to express his or her views before these laws were passed reads that these laws are passed, is that going to be like, oh my God, now it's illegal? You kind of knew that you're going to, you know, lose a job and end up in jail and pay a huge fine. And even before these laws were passed. So this semblance of legality is something that is, I think, a little bit artificial. But what I really hope that is that the international community calls this bluff. Yeah, okay, fine, let's treat these as laws, but let's do the legal analysis of those. Are these laws in accordance with the international norms? Are they that the Belarusian government, that the Belarus has taken upon itself to uphold through the primacy of international law that is enshrined in the constitution? Let's take a look at that. But let's not forget that even without these laws, things have been happening that are definitely in violations of international norms and standards, starting from, elections. And that's been repeatedly pointed out, and there was ample opportunity for the authorities to improve the conduct of elections. But they haven't taken up the recommendations from the past, not because they're difficult to implement, but because good elections are risky. In good elections, somebody loses and somebody wins. Nobody wants to lose, especially those who have been in power for a long time.
Yeah, thank you very much for that assessment. Yeah, I think the point that you made earlier about the fact that what does it really change, I think that's also a very, very interesting one. And yeah, thank you very much. Zoe.
Yes, I want to get into the real concrete work more than the situation itself. So you, as the special representative for elections, maybe if you could give us like a walkthrough and some concrete examples of what is the work that you do, what are you preparing for, how would you like to try to start these negotiations, and how do you want to reform the election systems? Like, give us some concrete examples of what you're working on currently.
We're back to elections. Yes. I mean, in enough of geopolitics and the general political considerations. Let's get back to what I'm really expert in. glad to tell you more about it. So, as I mentioned, the idea that we have is that the exit of the crisis would be the early elections, snap elections. It's very clear that there will not be time and the opportunity to amend the election laws before we get into the early elections. Try to think of it in a way that, okay, negotiations happen. The whole idea for negotiations is to figure out how to and when to hold the snap elections. And to hold the snap elections, a certain person has to resign from a certain job, and that would be an interim president. And then we automatically go into early elections. So we have a law which is not particularly good. And it's not only my assessment, it's the assessment of all the international observation missions and the citizen observers. It's not particularly good. It's actually in very many ways not a good law. But that doesn't mean that it makes it totally impossible to have pretty decent elections. The law is actually self-contradictory in very many places. It says one thing in one article and the totally opposite in the other one. Maybe not totally opposite, but it's very open to interpretation. It doesn't detail some of the procedures, sometimes probably on purpose. It doesn't tell you how to really count the votes at the polling station. Maybe the election law doesn't always have to tell you all the details, but this one definitely does not tell you much. So this basically means that the early elections will be held on the basis of the existing law and the resolutions and the sub-legal regulations of the Central Election Commission. And what we have done so far, we've published drafts of 4 key regulations. Why these 4? Because these are the 4 big issues that have been highlighted as deeply problematic in the previous elections. And I'm talking about the 4 topics. So maybe going through them one by one, and what we have changed, The first one is let's start sort of chronologically, Before everything happens, you'd want to have observers in place. So let's start from election observers. One thing that we really wanted to change, and the law doesn't prohibit it, so it makes it possible, we wanted to have observers present at the stage of when the commissions are formed. Before, under the previous regulations, observers only appeared later. So the process of forming the commissions was not particularly observable. And there were some kind of exceptions made to international observers when they were lucky enough to be there when the commissions were formed. The second big thing that we've fixed in the regulation on observers is the access rights. We are not using it from, we're not treating the access rights from the perspective of here is what you are allowed and here is what you're not allowed to do, yeah? What we're doing is creating a regulation that says observers cannot be limited in their rights of access to this, this, and this, to basically all stages and documents in the election process. That's a very different logic behind it. And the way we are able to do that is by referencing the general principle of transparency and openness, which is enshrined very high up in the election legislation. So before the election legislation, Article 13 goes into the rights of the observers. It declares that openness and transparency are the primary criteria. And that is exactly what we're doing through the regulation. And there are some other smaller details in there. So let's go then to the commission formation. Yes, one of the first stages in the process. The problem with that we've seen in the formation of the commissions, there were not particularly clear criteria of who ends up on commission for what reason. You sort of look at them and then you start understanding why people are there. There were also some details in the regulations previously that allowed friendly parties to be present everywhere and unfriendly parties to not be present anywhere. The nomination commission members can also be nominated by citizens in Belarus. You can gather 10 signatures of your neighbors and you can be considered to be a member of the commission. That's great news if it worked. So in our resolution, what we've tried to do, we've solved this issue of some parties being able to nominate 2 people to the commission and some none. Now every party, every public association can nominate 1 person to any commission, but the number of people in the commissions nominated from parties and citizen like associations in a way, NGOs, yeah, would be limited to 1/3 of the commission, which is perfectly within the law. The idea is that the bulk of the people in the commissions would come from the citizens. And we have good hopes that, you know, the interest in being part of the commissions that we've seen last year will also be demonstrated in the early elections that we're planning to hold. A very significant part of the procedure for appointing commissions would be under our regulation, the transparency and the openness and the ability to ask questions and make suggestions in the public and open hearing. So, for example, the hearing is ongoing and you, Zoe, are, you know, one of the citizens who lives in this area. So you can show up and you can ask a question and you can say, hold on, why are we considering this person to be a member of the commission? Isn't that the person who has been in the commission for 10 years and we all know what he or she has been doing? A valid question to ask. You cannot prohibit people from becoming members of commission by law, but you can ask questions. And there could be a debate. And these questions would be recorded in the minutes and then would be public for consideration, yeah? So this is a control mechanism. The publicity of it would be a control mechanism to make sure that the commissions are actually representative of the people. Then the third thing, we got the commissions, now, you know, candidates. One of the ways to become a candidate for presidency, and the only way really, is to collect 100,000 signatures. 100,000 in 6.8 million people who are voting in Belarus, it's too much. The normal practice is 1% or less, yeah? So that's about 1.5%, which is too much. Anyways, but you can't change it because it's in the law. Our idea is that we're having elections under this law, so let's not change it. In the future, we will. But for now, let's stick to 100,000. In the past, the attitude was that when the signatures are submitted, the commissions are doing everything they can to find bad signatures. So their idea is to look for bad signatures. Enough bad signatures in the sample of the submitted signatures to not register the candidate. And if you really need to, you will register the ones who are friendly. Yeah. So what in our regulation, in our proposal, we're changing this logic. So instead of looking for bad signatures, we're proposing that we need to be looking for good signatures. We need to be looking as long as needed to find these 100,000 good signatures. And if it takes an extra effort, well, so be it. But that's a more correct attitude to respecting the rights of both the candidates and the people who signed in their support. And other details such as allowing to correct minor mistakes. Yeah, in the past, they would invalidate 50 signatures in one go because somebody put a comma in the wrong place. I mean, seriously? If a comma is in the wrong place, or there's I don't know, a full stop missing somewhere, yeah, let's stick to the law. Let's ask the person to correct this small mistake. Give them 24 hours, I don't know, up to 48 hours, but before the deadline, and bring it back, and we'll count the signatures. So that's the idea there. And the fourth one is the counting of the votes. And here we propose both the regulation and the new format of a protocol for counting the votes. I'll give you an example. In the protocol that was used last year and before that, and it's very easy to understand. You know, what happens first when the votes are being counted? They're taking care of the ballots that have been used and have been unused, yeah? The ballots that have not been used are counted first. The empty ballots, yeah, that had no voters. That's a very natural first step. And that was the first step in Belarus as well. But guess what? In the past, this number goes into the last line of the protocol. Why? The only reason is to make the numbers match. So what we are proposing is that the protocol is filled out as the process goes. You counted the unused ballots, you put them in. Counted the spoiled ballots, you put the number in. You counted the ballots, the signatures of voters on the voter list, you put that number in. And then at a certain point, you do a reconciliation of your figures. Does your number of ballots match the number of signatures? And if not, maybe you should recount. Mistakes are possible. Absolutely fine. We're all humans. Yeah. And if the numbers still don't match, write a note to file and attach it to the protocol, and then proceed, and then count the votes, and then do another reconciliation. And in that way, the protocol will guide you through the process. And if the numbers don't match, well, many things can happen. Life is more complicated than any regulation. And it's fine, as long as we know where the problems occurred and why. And another detail, now in Belarus is actually a fantastic know-how. In the system that was used for the last, 20 years, it's not just the candidates, it's not just the observers who don't know the real results. The commission members don't know the real results. They count their part of ballots, quietly tell to the chairperson what their results are, then the chairperson does the magic, and you have a total result for the polling station. Nobody knows what the real results are. It's a total know-how. Amazing. I mean, a part of my nerdy brain in elections is basically saying, wow, congratulations, you figured out an amazing way to run a bad election. But what we're proposing is that this protocol is also publicly filled out. On the wall, there's a big copy, and as you go, you put the numbers in, and you show every ballot to everybody. So that's the idea. That's what we're working on. And that's all public. That's all on the website. We're getting comments. And, I'll be honest, I'm not pretending that I'm the smartest guy in the room. We can make mistakes. We can, not account for something. So we're listening to the comments, and we're going to release the corrected, updated versions. Regretfully, there is still time until we run early elections, but this time gives us an opportunity to have really good regulations. And that's the first step in the work that we're doing. The next comes the ideas on the election code.
Yeah, thanks to giving this like insight to, well, the concrete measures that you're proposing and the drafts of these regulations about election observers and so on. And yeah, it's an interesting thing that you keep in actually all the four categories. You kind of switch the logic. So you change the logic, for example, from counting good signatures to bad signatures, or the other way around, of course. So it's like, yeah, reversing the logic for the whole election system, you could say. So these regulations would be in use in early elections, as I understand it, correct?
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah.
We have the old law, which is imperfect, but they're really good regulations, and we run the snap elections with those.
Yeah, and so this snap election, what is the timeline for this? I mean, how can you have these like snap or quick elections, and when do you think like that would be able to happen?
Basically, the constitution is pretty precise. Yeah, if the position of the president is vacant, the prime minister becomes the acting president, and the snap elections have to be held between 30 and 70 days from the day that the vacancy is announced. And the vacancy can come for many reasons. You know, there's a whole variety of reasons why the post may become vacant. But 30 days, frankly speaking, not enough. You need to do a bit too much. We're also doing modeling of the possible calendar. Yeah, some deadlines are prescribed in the law, but the law is also very clear that if the early elections are held, the election commission, Central Election Commission, can establish the deadlines. Obviously, we would want to keep the deadlines proportional to what the normal deadlines would be. But our assessment is that we would need 60 to 65 days to hold the early elections. So it's almost 70. Yeah, we'd want to have it more quickly. Yeah, we're trying to find ways on how you would do it a bit more quickly. Maybe we will be able to shave off a couple of days. Yeah, transition benefits to a certain degree from being a quick one. Too many things can happen. Yeah, this agreements may unravel as you're preparing for elections. So let's, get it done when the chance is there. But yeah, it would need a bit of time. 60 to 65 days is our current assessment, but we're working on maybe shaving off a couple of days here or there. But, on the one hand, you kind of want to give it time so that it works. If you give some processes too little time, you might have too many mistakes. And 45 days would give you about 12 days of election campaign. 12 days for election campaign is not really nice.
Yeah.
Some countries do it, yeah?
Mm.
Like I remember, I see you have a slightly Danish name. Denmark is famous for having super quick elections. But that's fine because the campaign is ongoing in Denmark from the day that the election results are announced. So maybe if we see that we can have a normal political debate and discussion in the interim period, then maybe we could live with a shorter formal campaign period. Was I right? It's a slightly Danish name.
Yes, I don't know how you guessed that, but yes, I am Danish.
This funny letter was A and E linked.
Exactly. Yes. Also, I just want a quick reminder to the audience. Also, feel free to write in the chat. It was really good questions we had so far from the audience, so keep it going. But yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question regarding, because I find it very, very promising, your approach to basically taking the current system and trying to basically create a very, very rigid framework under to which to operate, so that you can actually have basically facilitate or squeeze the most out of the current system in a way to facilitate democratic election. But for example, one of the things that I kind of stumbled on just now was the fact that you need 100,000 people, 100,000 signatures in order to raise or like suggest a candidate in a way, and like you yourself, man, said that this is too much. Like usually it's a much lower number of giving the percentage of the whole country. So I was wondering, like, with the emergence also of like two new parties, I think there was a question in the audience about it as well. Will that make it more difficult for you? Like, because after all, like, yes, like getting basically these regulations into place would already be a huge victory for democracy. But after all, I think there is a belief that the current administration is not does not support that, and even like under a democratic election, like you would hope for a different outcome in a way. What's basically having two new parties, would it make would it make this effort to like kind of would it make it more difficult to win the election as well, and basically facilitate the further structural changes that you hope for?
John, I'll be clear, I don't hope for a different outcome. I hope for a different process. The outcome can be whatever it will be, as long as, we get the normal campaign where people can say what they think and collect the signatures without going to jail, and when the votes are counted honestly and transparently, the outcome can be whatever it is. I think the first time we have a normal election, we will actually have a sense that we can actually elect a government. And if we don't like what we've just elected, we can probably elect a new one, because we've just counted the votes honestly. So that will be the major achievement. Who wins the election? I mean, tons of good people out there. And speaking of the 100,000 signatures, I mean, it's a bit too much. It's a 1.5%. The international good practice says let's not go above 1%, but that's what we have. And it's not been a huge problem in the past. At the last year, for example, Mr. Babariko, who is now in jail for 8 months now, 9 months, he's been a prospective candidate. He was put in jail before he submitted the signatures, but he has submitted 450,000 signatures while being in jail.
That is a lot. That is a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
Another candidate, Valery Tsipkalo, submitted, I think, 200,000 or something. I don't remember anymore. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya also in way above 100,000. Mm-hmm. And then she started collecting signatures without being fantastically well known. She was known as her last name was known because of her husband's last name, but Sergei Tikhanovsky has been in jail, and she just stepped in at the last moment, and she collected more than 100,000 signatures, and was registered, which was probably a major mistake politically. Right. Now looking back, but
right. So basically there's like no immediate shortage of the desire for people to change, but for like a more healthy democratic election, there should be a lower number, like a lower entry of barrier of entry.
I think so, but this is for the later stages, and I think the good news is that you can sign in support of many candidates in Belarus, at least that, which is a good thing. In some countries, you can have a lower threshold, lower number of signatures, but you can only sign in support of one, which is a bad idea because it's not really voting, What you're signing in support is basically saying, fine, show me what you have to show, and I'll make a decision later. And at least in Belarus, I know that a lot of people last year have been queuing to sign in support of very many candidates, very often except for one. But that was the sense. So that's good news. And, considering that 800,000 people voted on the Golos platform for the negotiations, in the time when they are afraid of doing even that online, even when we're hashing their phone numbers and we don't even know their phone numbers, I think these people will readily go out and support a candidate or two or three. So there will be competition. No worries about that, even with 100,000 signatures.
Right. The thing is, like, I think you have a very, very good answer about like the fact that you don't really care about that outcome. You want a different process, but basically, if you have a good process, and even have you like if the elections like or the votes show that for example the current president is not very desired, if you have a refusal to accept the election in a way, like having like not a like not seeing this peaceful transfer of power, which I think is the logic and the logical consequence of seeing an election and being a person being like voted out. But if you don't necessarily see that, like, does that process that you hope for, does that really matter in that way? Like,
what you're saying is that somebody may run and then not accept the results.
Yes, I have one specific person in mind that is currently ruling the Belarusian country.
Well, first of all, for the snap elections to happen, you have to have a reason. And the only reason to have snap elections is for somebody to resign. So that somebody wouldn't be running from a position of the current kind of position. But no, I think if we get to that stage, that's already a promise for success. We would be on a trajectory that would be a trajectory towards an acceptable result. In the end of the day, I think that it is easier to question the process when it's not particularly transparent. But it is very difficult to question the process when it has all the attributes of being a good process. When you don't have anything to hide, frankly speaking, well, be my guest, question the process. If the organizers of the elections have been showing every step and making everything publicly and explaining every single move they make, and maybe, yes, making mistakes along the way, but that's also fine. Don't, punish them for that right away. We're all humans and things are complicated. But yeah, go ahead, question. But the good process creates a acceptable outcome.
Right. I think also, like, if everybody basically confirms that, hey, we're willing to play by these rules, then yes, you will also it will be predetermined in the way that you hope for the fair process, and basically participation in that process will kind of also yeah.
I mean, the best election outcome is an unquestioned victory with 50.1%. Maybe in the second round, yeah? And if nobody questions that, when there's 5 votes that divide the winner and the loser, and nobody questions that, that's a sign of a healthy democracy. When the loser concedes and says, I've lost. But also when the loser knows that losing an election doesn't mean losing everything.
Yep. We have an
Tatiana,
audience.
yeah?
We would like to give her the floor. Yes, perfect. Here we are.
Hi, Tatiana. I saw your questions and I wanted to get back to you. So pleased to see you on the screen.
Thank you for giving me the floor, and it's very interesting, the discussion you've had, and you have a very clear a very clear process envisaged, and which makes perfect sense for people like us who want the democratic transition in Belarus. But I would like to ask you, is the democratic opposition unanimous with the steps you described and the negotiations you call for, or there are other alternatives which are being envisaged? And I ask this question notably in the context of the creation of 2 political parties just last week by Mr. Latushka and Mr. Babarika. Thank you very much.
Great question. Are you a political scientist by any chance?
No, I'm a I'm a colleague from the Council of Europe, which you haven't mentioned once. Which you haven't mentioned once, I think, but that's okay. It's normal. You're loyal to your former organization.
No, that's a good opportunity to talk Council of Europe, actually. So, are the opposition leaders unanimous in that? In the call for the negotiations, yes. Absolutely. I think everybody has endorsed this idea publicly in the closed door meetings as well. Obviously, there are people who demand quicker action. There are radicals here and there, people who want to do, sharper moves. But, this is the nature of the democratic in the true sense forces. People can have various opinions, but by and large, everybody agrees that the negotiations is the peaceful solution to the crisis. Speaking of the Council of Europe, I think it's quite an interesting. I mentioned it once or twice actually, but what we're seeing is that it's a bit difficult for Council of Europe to be involved because Belarus is not a member state. So there are no formal mechanisms that the Council of Europe can use at this moment in time. But I think what is very clear is that it is in the mutual interest of the democratic forces in Belarus and the Council of Europe that Belarus paves the way to enter the Council of Europe. That is something that is absolutely the common interest of the pro-democracy people and the Council of Europe as the organization. So I think the Council of Europe, by not having Belarus amongst its members, is also not tying its hands. It doesn't have to work exclusively with the authorities. And we would want to have the expertise of the Council of Europe given to us, to our proposals on how to have elections, for example. I would not mind having a conclusion of the Venice Commission on the ideas that we're proposing. There is a publicly discussed early draft of a possible constitution for New Belarus. Why not have Venice Commission take a look at that? But unfortunately, it's not happening yet. What is happening is there are two resolutions that have passed the Political Affairs and the Democracy, what is the correct title? Political Committee in the Council, in the Parliamentary Assembly.
And Legal Affairs and Human Rights Committee.
Exactly. In both of those committees, one resolution has passed through the committee, and they will be discussed next week in the plenary in the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. So those resolutions are very helpful, but we do want a bit more from them, especially the one on the urgent need on electoral reform. I think that can go a little bit further in terms of calling for a more robust dialogue in Belarus. But then there is also another one that is another report by Kimmo Kiljunen that is being prepared on specifically on dialogue in Belarus. And we very much look forward to working with Kimmo, who I have known since 10 years ago, and helping them make a call for a dialogue that is meaningful. So yeah, Council of Europe can play a role. Unfortunately, I think it's in a bit of a waiting mode, hoping to assist the authorities to reform the country as it is right now. Whether that's realistic or not, I'm not so sure.
Can I add something? Is it possible?
Go ahead.
Up to moderators.
Could I just very briefly to say that I'm not sure that the rules of the Venice Commission would allow to look at a draft constitution not stemming from the authorities in power, but the Venice Commission recently issued an opinion on the amendments to the criminal code related to freedom of assembly, and it did it in an all-inclusive dialogue. So there is already an opinion of the Venice Commission on related to the current event in Belarus. And for the rest, obviously, I cannot comment on your wishes, but obviously the objective is that one day Belarus joins the organization, and hopefully sooner than later. Thanks a lot.
I think we're very much on the same page. Tatiana, please feel free to reach out to me and we can take it forward as well and explore other ways of how Council of Europe can be involved, even in the current situation. And thanks for joining in. Really good questions.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I will.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tatiana. That's great that you took part. Yeah, I think we are pretty much over time now. Maybe we touched on so many issues, so thanks a lot for all the great answers. Maybe a final question. Where do you see Belarus in 5 years? What's your estimation, hope?
It's the standard question for the job interview, right? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I think that's a difficult question to answer. Where I see Belarus in 5 years, I see Belarus going straight back to Tatiana. I see Belarus in 5 years as the full member of the Council of Europe. I see Belarus as the respected and the equal partner in international affairs, a partner with whom both East and West and North and South can speak and are willing to speak to. I see, more importantly than anything international and talking about, what is the country doing, I see Belarus as a country of respected and mutually respectful people who, despite their differences, know how to and want to live together and want to enjoy good elections. I think that that's absolutely within reach. I think in the end of the day, it's a country of almost 10 million of really good people. And I hope that, these people, speaking from my perspective, deserve equally good elections. And that's what they're hoping for.
Thank you for this nice positive note at the end. It was a great discussion.
And I'm not trying to create, a rosy picture for 5 years ahead. I think it's absolutely within reach.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. You shouldn't give up hope before you've tried. Yeah.
I wouldn't have joined this team and this debate if I was not hopeful, and honestly. And thanks to Juraj for joining as well. I've known Juraj from my work in the OSCE. Thanks for being with us. And a lot of familiar names and faces here.
Yeah, that concludes everything. And thank you so much all for joining. And Alexander, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for organizing. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was, our pleasure really as well. Wow, great insights. So that concludes our discussion today. And we just want to shortly mention that already in a week's time, we have another debate coming up. So if you're interested in the whole Brexit debate and also the EU at large, you should join us with the president of the European movement in Denmark, Stine Bosse, a really interesting figure as well. Join us then, and you can find it on Facebook and on our social media. But once again, thank you so much for joining us today, for audience, for Alexander, and we really hope to see you next time as well.
I'll be pleased to come and join you. Thanks a lot for the fantastic moderation and great questions.
Thank you.
Ciao. Bye-bye.